Becoming a powerful athlete. Strength is obviously one of those things that we all consider to be super important in strength and conditioning. And it is. It is the base builder. It is what we consider to be the foundation of all sports performance. Although there is a quality that we can derive from strength that actually gives us the best transference onto the sporting field. That quality is power, and that ability to be able to produce lots of force very fast. So power is usually measured with force times velocity. So basically, how fast can you move an object, whether that object being your body or another implement. And obviously this transfers really well to the sporting field. A lot of the time we are moving our own bodies and we're trying to move them rapidly. But sometimes we also have implements. So if you're thinking about throwing, you're trying to throw an implement maybe as fast as you can. There's a level of power that you need for that. Bowling, throwing a disc. Football doesn't always necessarily need power to kick, but if you want to kick really long, you need a powerful leg. You can't just kick it slowly and expect it to go long. Like, you need to kick it hard and relatively quickly. So why is power so important to athletes? So power, as I just mentioned, creates that transfer between what we do in the gym and what kind of athletic qualities we can express on the field. So if you think about some of the best athletes in the world, like, what kind of defines them? What kind of separates them from other people? Skill certainly comes down to it, but sometimes, it is athleticism, and those athletes that show more power, being quicker, they just seem more dominant. So that's why power can be really influential when it comes to athletic performance. So how can power be developed? So there's a few different ways power can be developed, and there's actually a bit of a spectrum. It's referred to often as the force velocity curve, where at the top of the curve, force is expressed in like a 1 rep max, and then down the bottom end of the curve, down this end, is velocity, which is maximal sprinting. And power can kind of work in between those two curves. One end, 1 rep max might have a large amount of force, but it's usually very slow, especially relative to the other end. And then sprinting usually has a low amount of force, but has a very high amount of velocity. So power is a curve, and you can develop power along that curve. There's different elements of force, and over time, basically. So examples would be like, sprinting, jumping, cutting, throwing, kicking and tackling. These are all actual sports-based examples. There are many more, but these are the ones that kind of stick out. Now, while these can obviously be implemented in your sport-specific training, they're generally not maximal efforts. And for power to be developed beyond its current ability, maximal effort needs to be placed. There is a certain level of intensity, so load, that needs to be produced depending on what kind of power output you want to create. And most sports training kind of works with submaximal power output over multiple times. So the theory being, if you can kind of improve your maximal power input, or even your average power output, then when you go to repeat these smaller efforts, they aren't as taxing, and you can actually maybe even apply more power more often in these smaller sub-maximal tasks. So if you want to develop power, your sports training isn't going to be enough. So one of the best places to develop power is in the gym. So what are some exercises that we can do in the gym that help develop power and carry over really well to the field or your sports? So things like weighted jumping, so squat jumps, vertical jumps with external loads like dumbbells, maybe having a trap bar or a weight vest. You can even do things like plyometrics, which is the very fast ability to kind of absorb and express force, jumping and landing tasks. We're thinking more continuous stuff like bounding and jumping over hurdles and those types of things. Then you've got kettlebells, in particular the kettlebell swing. There are other kettlebell movements, but the kettlebell swing in particular is a loaded, explosive movement. Really good for the hip extensors that carry over to running and jumping for that matter. And then there are the Olympic lifts, so power cleans and power snatches, sometimes jerks. Olympic lifting is basically fast strength training. Like you're moving some pretty heavy weights very fast, which is excellent, especially if you are in a contact sport as well, where you also have to receive the load. And that's basically what a tackle is. You're absorbing someone else's force. So Olympic lifting is great for not only producing power, but also absorbing power and resisting other external forces. Medicine balls are really good for throwing, can also use for hip extension as well, but they're a really good implement to use to develop the throwing the athlete. And also really good for any kind of rotational trunk work as well, to develop kind of midsection or core power as well. Then you've got things like sprinting itself can develop power, but resisted sprinting itself has that nice little element of a little bit of external resistance to develop the force side of things. Resisted sprinting can be very good for acceleration, and it's very specific to running type events or sports. So the critical part to power training is actually the intent. So whatever exercise you choose, you just need to have the intent to move it as fast as you can. And depending on what loads you have on, will depend on how much speed you can generate and what kind of type of power you can actually create. So there is faster versions of power and there are slower versions of power. We come back to that force velocity curve, and ideally we're trying to surf the curve. So where we do develop some heavier fast power would be like your Olympic lifts. Then you might move down the curve a little bit more ballistic with the medicine ball throws and weighted jumping, and then right down towards the velocity and is your plyometrics and your resisted sprinting. So a mix of all three gives you the best output from a power perspective. But when you are doing a power exercise, it is so critical to move either yourself or the object as fast as possible. Even if it is heavy and you can't actually physically move it that fast, as long as you have the intent to move it fast, you will be developing power qualities. So we suggest that you get your foundational stuff down first. Get your big movement patterns down: squat, hinge, push, pull. Make sure you can move competently through those movements. Then you can start to layer in some simpler power exercises, and that's where jumping and landing tasks and your throws, they're probably the simpler power movements. Once you've mastered them, then you can add the more complex and complicated exercises, power exercises like your Olympic lifts and your kettlebell movements and even your resisted sprinting. So you do kind of have to earn the right. Strength is your base. You build your base, get really foundational there, and then you can start adding, more speed elements to your training from there. Just remember, being strong is one thing, but being fast is a whole different thing. So you do have to train it. All right, thanks.